Okay, so funny story. I was in the middle of writing a new script for another video when, as I like to call it, I kind of mentally fell into the backrooms. So the time has come again for me to talk about the hidden empty world parallel to our own. The one that we usually only see through dreams and after the occasional, faceplant into a wall. I'm not even gonna pretend I'm not unapologetically obsessed with this and have been for the last 3 years, but rest assured I am working on the Trevor video, so if any of you guys watching are still excited for that, I'll be feeding that metaphorical dog soon. Now, I'm sure many of you guys are wondering by the title, what world exactly I am talking about. And for lack of better words, liminality is a word that I think that people hear the most often when talking about this sort of thing, mostly from the liminal spaces craze of the 2020s. Now, I don't know why this happened, arguably due to, the time when the whole fucking planet basically was liminal. Those were the days. Well, except for the people who actually like being in society. It's honestly so bad that, mark my words, when I do eventually get older into my 60s, I'm gonna be that one guy in a nursing home talking about how back in my day, everything technically was liminal, and then everyone's just gonna accuse me of being off my meds and fucking sedate me. But for the record, for those of you that don't remember that time, it was around when Mandela Catalog and Kane's Backrooms series released, and to be honest, it was surprisingly rich for horror in general, and it's unfortunate that we don't see that much new stuff being released nowadays. I honestly think my obsession stems from the fact of, wouldn't it actually be super fucking cool to actually be able to explore these places for a long period of time, if not just, live there. And you could explore the locations that are actually realistic based on real ones, and then the ones that are utterly batshit crazy, but still pretty damn cool. But after about a couple years of thinking this way, nowadays I kinda have to ask myself, could you actually live in a place like this? And with that, could the human mind actually deal with complete and total isolation, venturing into extremely improbable locations? I'll be starting with the more comforting tiers and diving into eventually the horrific liminal horror. So if y'all enjoyed this video and don't want me to be known as Mr. Homeless in a few months, make sure to drop a like and comment telling me how much I got shit wrong, so then more people can experience this video. And if you do, thank you, it helps me out a lot. Now, liminality as a whole has a lot of gray area, but in the basic sense it's supposed to technically mean the area between two things, kind of like how most of these images are between two locations, like a hallway being between your bedroom and the kitchen. Others come way closer to locations themselves, like bedrooms, grocery stores, and other areas. But I've come to notice the best ones have an appeal because they are private versions of areas that often tend to fucking suck because of the floods of people there. And that may just be my humble outlook on them, but to me, it seems like at least a portion of it. Take the pool rooms for an example. Serene pools as far as the eye can see. But have you ever been to a public pool? It's an absolute nightmare. You get about, 4 inches of space before you run into the next set of unsupervised children or an overweight adult in an inner tube waiting to accidentally drown you. Overall, just takes a lot of the fun out of it for me. And honestly, I don't even have to imagine what overcrowding does to liminal spaces, because I've actually physically been to the closest thing to an amusement park that's liminal space based, which is the Omega Mart in Vegas, and honestly the noise and egregious overcrowding made the experience like a C tier at best. So for a second, let's take all of that away. We now have our liminal wonderland, endless exploration. You just got the perfect playlist ready, and all you need to do is enjoy the amazing sights of... Oh my god, I've just thrown myself into a nightmare. Liminal spaces, while seeming like a paradise when scrolling on Reddit or something, is an absolute horror show if you actually put yourself inside of them. There is a fine middle ground in my opinion, and when it comes to the amount of living things in your proximity, I would say anything above 10 people starts to make my lack of being able to be a normal human being become apparent. And on the opposite of the spectrum, anything 2 or below is where the schizophrenia begins to become a common predicament. And what's worse is not everything is going to be a hallucination. It doesn't really matter whether you're in an empty location either, being completely alone, or with just one other thing, because no matter what, you're always going to be feeling like something else is there with you. To me, there are 2 main paths that liminality can go down: the inhabited liminality or the desolate liminality. And today I'm going to be going over both. Okay, quick side note, if anyone who's seen my other videos is noticing that I have a little bit more energy, it's mostly because I've been doing some experimenting when I'm writing my scripts. And by experimenting, I mean like drinking 600 milligrams of caffeine and staying up until 4 a.m. and then letting my hyperactivity essentially write for me. So y'all are gonna have to let me know what you think. Next up, we have what we like to call the first tier, if you will, of liminality. This liminality, in my opinion, will always be far darker because the only real threat you have is your own mind. And as I'm sure most of us already know, our own mind can often be the worst fate on planet Earth. In this scenario, one day you simply walk through an odd door only to end up in a world where no one and nothing will ever exist. And you can finally be all alone. Yeah, that's honestly how I expected this world was going to turn out. And to make things easier, there actually seems to be, for lack of better term, an aesthetic, God I hate that word, built around losing your ground in liminal spaces. Some like to call it weirdcore, but I think it's better described as the voices coming back again. JAMA Psychiatry states that in a study where people are completely isolated both socially and sensory-wise, they kind of begin to go insane no matter how stable they were before. Alternatively, we also see the same predicament in prisoners who have solitary confinement for long periods of time. They're kept in this as sort of like a punishment inside of their punishment. You can tell it borderline violates something. A lot of these people do end up seeing similar patterns with increased mental damage and wanting to take their own life. Along with, a lot of other things. One of which being just straight up hallucinations and fear of death, which is incredibly ominous given the circumstance, especially since with enough time here, this will start to look like this, and this will start to look like this. But I can't pretend this bizarre insanity isn't also super fucking interesting. And I don't know what exactly that says about me, but hey, at least I still have you guys, right? But I will admit, there's some weirdcore that is a little bit too much, for lack of a better term, seizure-inducing for my taste, but I think there's a certain sweet spot that really tickles my fancy. So if most of you are still confused on what weirdcore actually is, well, good, that's kind of the point. But in the most basic terms, picture if everything around you watched you and all your horrible thoughts were on display in front of you, leading you to believe that you're either dreaming or you've made some seriously questionable life decisions with the stuff that's typically okay to eat and things you probably shouldn't. So I guess that explains the mushrooms. But to get back on topic of actually living here, I feel like it'd be pretty difficult to, at this point in your mental decline, find any sort of food and water in this place, which is obviously a problem because at this point you're going to start eating the furniture and licking the walls. My best guess would be you should start looting one of the liminal fridges or rummaging through the liminal grocery stores, which both may result in unsurmountable amounts of dread when every item stares at you, and then there's shadows where the cashier should be. But the way I see it, you would either go along with this madness, living in a perpetual state of an ignorant bliss, or you would likely end up at the bottom of the first pit you encounter. Either way, that's honestly a nightmare I would not want to be a part of. Okay, so with this section, I know what you're going to say. Why would you explain, inhabited liminality when the title says empty? But before you throw me into a sort of metaphorical bonfire in the comments, I want to specify exactly what I mean by inhabited. To cut to the point, there aren't going to be any other humans around you. And I think this is where liminal horror, like the backrooms, mostly comes into play, along with games like Yumeniki 1 and 2 and the LSD Dream Emulator, both of which seem to revolve around the idea of how dreams and liminality often go together. In order to properly explain the second tier, I want to start in this iconic room, with an impassable door and a single balcony. This is the beginning of one of the biggest liminal rabbit holes that you can find, but I'm actually more focused on its sequel in this video. Both games revolve around the idea of accessing this parallel world through deep REM sleep, a world that its pure size mimics the abyss of space. The base concept of the game is that you're going to pick one of the original dozen or so doors to walk through, and then you're going to explore whatever world they lead to, inside of which carry their own entrances and exits to other areas. This leads you through a massive spider web of surreal liminal worlds, but this time each filled with their own random entities. Now, as much as I'd like to go on like a 2 or 3 hour rant on how much I love Yumeniki, I'd rather not lobotomize who's ever left on this video, so I'm going to be sticking to what's relevant here. Typically in these scenarios, you're always kind of surrounded by some sort of being, some just kind of existing and others being more hostile. It kind of reminds me of the movie Spirited Away in a sense, and with the fact that you really have no clue what the fuck you're going to run into. So does that mean these kind of liminal spaces are better? Well, in the sense that you won't be here as long, I kind of think brings the aspect of horror into liminality. In a way, it can oddly reflect real life a bit, and the fact that you pass hundreds of things per day, some of which could likely kill you, but in a morbid way, that's kind of part of the fun. The Toraninjin, for an example. God, I'm butchering that so hard. In Yumeniki, they appear all over the place as sort of female characters with bird faces, typically play as harmless background characters until they don't. This sort of insanity state, as it's called, often causes them to run down the player, sending them back to another area if they are caught. Random events like this are what makes Yumeniki feel truly off-putting and extremely unique. As one run, for an example, you could spot people falling from the sky, on another you could just suddenly melt, or an entity could appear right in front of you. And one of the best parts of this is you could literally at any time just walk into this game and just start randomly going through areas, and you would never see the same area twice. You could literally just keep going and going and going, and each area has its unique set of music, its unique entities, its unique world. It's just the best thing ever, and I cannot recommend playing it more, especially the sequel. Now, I don't think I can go over both weirdcore and dreamcore without going over the nostalgic aspects of them too, and how they kind of build the appeal of this as a whole. Because after all, some of these worlds, hell, what am I talking about? Most of these worlds have some sort of feeling that you've been there or seen something like that before. Almost as if it was a prior part of your life. For me in particular, liminal malls are literally fucking heroin to me. I absolutely love the idea of a gigantic mall that feels so familiar and has no one inside of it. And Nemeopolis is an amazing example of this. It starts with you falling into a gigantic area consisting of these same pools and malls. The odd thing is, I don't think many of these memories actually belong to us. And hear me out with this. Many of these images look familiar, but these were popular way before I was born. So how could they seem this familiar? Nostalgiacore images typically are designed to bring comfort, but the more you realize you shouldn't recognize these places, the more you start realizing something here fucks with your mind, and there may be someone here, closer than you think. Nostalgic areas in this world tend to be death traps, either mentally or physically, with the fun room being one of the best examples. These false memories almost seem to lull you into a sense of security, almost so they can pick you off easier. This is mimicked in the game where you essentially make your way through many different nostalgic locations, while something seems to always follow behind, always just out of sight. But you know damn well it's there, which is kind of what I meant earlier when I was talking about there not being much difference between alone and, well, basically alone. Either way, you won't be able to function without the fear that someone is over your shoulder. But you aren't getting out. So you're gonna have to take this thing out, or at least find a way to separate yourself from it. But what happens when the entities become just as vast as the levels themselves? The concept of infinity, in my opinion, is a huge part of these empty worlds. And with that in mind, we move into one of the darkest forms of liminal horror, starting with these iconic dingy yellow rooms. If liminal spaces in weirdcore is glimpses into liminality, the backrooms makes an entire world out of it. For an example, what if there was a lot of chair? And what if that field you were wandering in just never stopped? Each one of these creations, if you look on the wikis, is given its own designation and description on what is found there by people who were lucky or unlucky enough to explore it. And again, I think this is another great rabbit hole that if you have any free time and are really curious about this shit, just start clicking on random levels on either the backrooms wikis and you'll have a really good time. They're almost like liminal spaces with lore. Almost as if each one is a picture that was taken on its own disturbing backrooms level. The backrooms is the liminal nightmare. Like, it's almost impossible to think about liminal horror without thinking of the backrooms in some regard. because unlike liminal spaces, it doesn't just show the aesthetic pool rooms or vibey cubicles. They're also going to show shit like freezing cold dungeon levels and claustrophobic mines. The backrooms on top of this doesn't really provide any sort of ability to choose. You're essentially at God's mercy the second you walk in. And sometimes, actually, the fuck am I talking about? Most times, all it takes to be thrown in is falling through a random wall. The backroom seems to give a much more physical feel, compared to like the worst thing in Yumeniki, where being simply like waking up. And in the backrooms, it's much more hands-on, if you will. Escaping, as many people have theorized, is borderline impossible, so you might as well just start finding a home here, which isn't as difficult as many people would think, because there's just tons of furniture scattered everywhere. You just kind of have to gather it all together and just find an area that's not completely deadly 24/7. And it doesn't even have to be one of the levels that like specifically already have pre-built homes, although that would work too. So far, it's just seemed like this would be a total nightmare, start to finish. In my opinion, the best representation of this is the small indie game Into the Backrooms. Unlike other Backrooms games, this one really envelops the surreal nature, with levels changing around you, randomly being teleported from one spot to another, where 1 second you're walking through halls of bizarre Roman art that doesn't really follow the laws of physics, while another you're talking to something claiming to be an angel. It just is the kind of shit that I seriously cannot get enough of. And to top it all off, there's a huge amount of hidden rooms, playable discs, and endings. Now I want to finish up this video by going over one more game that really caught my eye. Ever since it came out, I've really enjoyed the series Enna on YouTube, and it's definitely in my top 3 when it comes to these kind of bizarre surreal worlds. On the surface, it's kind of hard to understand what this series is actually about, but when you look more into it, it kind of explains more in depth what you're like the fragments your mind would be broken into when living in a world like this, or just in general. In the past, I did go over the actual like physical series on YouTube, but I've already done that, so today we're going to be going over the game that has come out since I made my last video. Playing Dream Barbecue makes me question a lot of things, but it helps me piece together a sort of theory on how interactions would eventually devolve into, with everything being trapped in this weird dimension together. Things as simple as looking for your boss at work have to string out into like 7 different layers of madness, traveling through mazes and puzzles, and in the end you really just end up losing yourself to this place. And I think that's the true moral of this video. Everything in this reality, if you can even call it that, is an endless maze that eventually leads to even the stablest minds to fall apart, whether from the isolation or simply from the idea that you'll likely be roaming the infinite sewer system, or in a broken dream world, barely even able to have the simplest interactions with entities that you likely won't ever understand, until one day they'll just kill you. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to my perspective of the dark reality behind these liminal space images, and just another ode to why I love them so much. I know I have to do these videos all the time, and I apologize. I'll try to get the Trevor video out as soon as possible. But until then, if you guys enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate giving it a like so other people can see it and can sort of gauge if you guys enjoy this kind of content. Regardless, if you made it to the end, thank you, because supporting these passion videos, if you call it, that I do every once in a while means a lot to me, because I know they're not what you would call trending, but I do have a hell of a lot of fun making them, so thank you.